just to let you settle down. Let me officially open this press conference. My name is Stevens Mukhalapa. I'm the Chief Builder for Build One South Africa. I will be the Program Director for today. I would want to welcome you and welcome the leadership here. Let me just briefly introduce the leadership that is here. We've got our leader, Dr. Musi Maimane. We've got our deputy leader, Nobuntu Hlazo Webster. We've got our member of the provincial legislature, Honorable Ayanda Ali. We've got our ground forces that are here. I'm recognizing Tsepo Mhlongo, our Gauteng provincial leader, and also Morapedi Malindi, our Johannesburg regional leader. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and also the support staff from the Gauteng legislature and from the national. And we also got our YBM leader, Henry Masuku. We've got also our Ekurileni leader, Mautuma Tibing. So all protocol observed, and thank you very much for being with us and gracing this event. We have convened you as Build One South Africa because we would want to share with you the current issues of national interest so that you know where Bosa stands in some of these issues. It will be articulated quite extensively and well by our well-capable leader. I will firstly call our leader to come and present. Then from there it will be followed by our DP. Then it will be Ayanda to give us the Gauteng perspective, and then the leader will come back to give the overall national picture, and then we will go for a Q&A, and then we will go for closure. So thank you very much for being here. Without further ado, let me call Dr. Musi Maimane. The floor is yours.
To members of the press, to fellow South Africans who are here, Bagaitsu Dumelang. First and foremost, let me recognize the fact that we are living in a society that is largely dangerous for women, fundamentally economically exclusive to women, and more than anything, a nation that doesn't always provide the best opportunities for women. And I wanted to start there because we cannot always be commemorating Women's Month by permanently saying Happy Women's Month. We need to work harder to be able to say that for Women's Month to be a happy one, we must do more in ensuring that South Africa is a safe place, that when you go to institutions of higher learning, the proportion of women is increased, and that ultimately when you look at economic inclusion and matters of fair pay, that women are well represented. It is not coincidental. I see one of the members of the press there wearing a Springbok jersey. I want to wish the woman well at the Women's World Cup. I must say, I'm less interested in what happens this weekend and more interested in what the Rugby Women's World Cup team does. And as we've been proudly represented in South Africa, I just do think that it's important that we take a moment in this month of August to not just sing songs about it, but ultimately commit ourselves to be able to be men who honor women, but also a nation that ensures that South African and South African women can prosper in it, in all sectors. So I open with that by saying Happy Women's Month. We're here today to speak adamantly about some of the issues that Build One South Africa has been facing, some of the GNU issues, the national dialogue, and ultimately a discussion about the local government elections. We've reflected deeply on many of these issues, and so this gives us an opportunity to speak about those. I will take you through a broad aspect of where this country sits, why the necessity for the national dialogue, and ultimately why fundamentally our economy must be the central discussion we have as a nation. In order to be able to achieve a South Africa that works for all, and as many would say, to truly build one South Africa, we need an economy that works. It is not accidental to note the fact that too many citizens are joining the ranks of the unemployed, and it is not accidental to note the fact that as we are caught up in a whirlwind of tariffs, in a whirlwind of geopolitical rearrangements, that South Africa facing increasing levels of violence, with many of our young people dropping out of school. Never has there been a more urgent time to not only address the sense of governance, what we do at National Assembly, provincial assemblies, and ultimately leading into local government. For if we fail the basic task of governing, then we undermine the gains of freedom. It's with those words, I want to open up the floor to our Deputy Leader, Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, to speak extensively about the work that Bosa has been doing in the National Assembly. We will then proceed to the provincial legislature, and then I will wrap up lastly with the sphere of government, which is national, and some of the issues that are facing the country. Dakhat.
I hear Malibongwe, it is not misplaced. You can say it louder, leader. Good morning. I want to greet the members of the press who are here with us this morning and thank them for joining us. I want to recognize the leadership of Build One South Africa that is here, from our national office, from our provincial office, and I want to say Sanbonani, good morning. The leader has outlined really how we're framing this briefing and what we're going to talk through, and I think it is very important to give an outline of what we have been doing in the National Assembly, particularly given that we are in a National Assembly that is characterized by a 70% executive. And so the role of the opposition has never been more important than it is now. And ours as Build One South Africa has been to ensure that we maintain a visible voice, that we are visible, a visibility is maintained, that we are principled, and that we have a constructive voice in National Assembly, never being opposition for the sake of being opposition, but being opposition for the sake of making sure that South Africans are well represented, the voices of South Africans are well represented, and that ultimately there's transparency and there's accountability. And it is not about grandstanding, but about truly ensuring that government does do its work. And so our work has been guided by a strategic framework that's focused on growing the economy and making sure that there's job creation. We are at a place in this country where we have a historically unseen level of unemployment, close to 70% by the expanded definition for young people and 40% generally. And so we are fighting to make sure that we see a growing economy, we see policy, we see implementation of policy that grows the economy, that our education system is a quality one in that it sets up young people to be actually not only just employable, to be able to create work and to be relevant to the global economy, that our communities are safe and they're secure, and that we have an effective and ethical government. And you'll see how in the work that we're doing, we are hitting all of those different pillars. The past term has obviously been dominated by the national budget process, and our leader, Dr. Musi Maimane, is chair of the Standing Committee on Appropriations, and he's ensured that there's rigorous oversight and principled engagement throughout the budget cycle. And on that note, I actually want to once again congratulate our leader on his doctorate. We are incredibly proud and know that we are well led, not only in SCOA and not only as a party, but as a leader in society and as a leader in South Africa. We wish to congratulate him once again. It's okay to clap. Yes. And so through this process, once again as Build One South Africa, we took a principled position, one actually that wasn't always popular throughout the process, but it was a position that said, let's ensure that South Africans are shielded, that South Africans are buffered from any crisis that could have come out of that process. And so through that vigorous process that had many deadlocks and delays, we ultimately saw the National Assembly pass the fiscal framework, the Division of Revenue Bill, and the Appropriations Bill, which now gives effect to 2.59 trillion national budget for the next financial year. We have actively been involved in exercising parliamentary oversight, especially through our work in committees. I sit in the Trade, Industry and Competition Portfolio Committee, the Small Business Development Committee, as well as the Water and Sanitation Committee as an alternative. And as I've said, our leader sits in the Standing Committee on Appropriations, which actually has been, I believe, more visible than it ever has been, and South Africans have been more engaged with the work of the appropriations than it ever has been under the leadership of Dr. Mmusi Maimane. We have sent and submitted 89 written questions and tabled those to ministers, and those have been exposing corruption, inefficiency, poor service delivery, and revealing information to the public about the government, but more than anything, seeking accountability. 10 parliamentary motions have been raised on national issues, and that has included issues of economic reform and youth development, safety, particularly for women. Our leader mentioned the issue of safety when it comes to women in this country, and this has been in light of us pushing for access to the National Register for Sex Offenders, as well as, given the geopolitics of this country, motions related to South Africa's foreign policy, water supply, which is in crisis at the moment, and infrastructure failures. We've had 3 key parliamentary or legislative submissions that we've made in this term. The first is the Fair Pay Bill, and the Fair Pay Bill really is about demanding pay transparency, ultimately to combat wage discrimination. And that is for young people, young work seekers that are entering the workplace, and as well as women particularly, because we know that there is a gender pay gap that exists where women or young people could be doing the same jobs, but because they've just entered the market or because they're simply women, they are then not paid fairly or equally to their counterparts. And so we submitted this bill on the 16th of June. There is currently technical engagement that's taking place with the legal team, and that's expected to conclude in October, November. And we have, in parallel with that, been running a petition on social media and garnering widespread support and input. And the outcome, and actually the responses and engagement, have been very positive that we've been getting from people who are in the workforce and who are professionals in South Africa. We have secondly been vigorously engaged with the issue of the 180 billion National Lotteries tender. It's the biggest tender that exists in the country. And I want to give a little bit of context as to why we've been at the forefront of fighting the issue of this tender. The National Lottery is built on an ecosystem. And anything that has to do with that ecosystem either being corrupted or collapsing means that there are beneficiaries in the most vulnerable of communities that are then affected. But it also means that there are businesses and there is economic activity that is affected. It's the retailers that are involved, it's the machinery that is involved, it is the whole ecosystem that then becomes affected. But not only could it become affected, it could also become corrupted. And so it is critical that we engage in this. We have seen what it meant when we had a whole dispensation of state capture in this country. And so we can't now, in a new dispensation and in a new administration, accept a capture of another kind. And with this being one of the biggest tenders in the country, it's critical that we ensure that we are not experiencing capture once again. And so that's why we have been heavily involved in this process and at the forefront of making sure that it is transparent, making sure that it is fair, and making sure that it is not a corrupted process. We've submitted a PAIA application for transparency. We've called for a parliamentary debate on the matter, and we have vigorously engaged the issue in the Department of Trade and Industry Portfolio Committee, at which I sit. The last engagement we had on the minister on this, I asked the minister to release the names of those who sat on the adjudication panel for the lotteries, and he committed on record to be able to do that. We have been following up on that, and we're still awaiting those names because the conflicts that have been revealed show that some of the people may have been sitting on those panels. And so we want that level of accountability when it comes to the tender. The matter is now in the courts following the minister's decision to award the lottery license to Sizekaya Holdings, and we continue to hold the minister accountable in terms of the lack of transparency and failure to provide transparency when it comes to the potential conflicts of interest that have arisen. And then lastly, we've been engaged with pursuing the National Register of for sex offenders being made public. We have consistently demanded transparency and accountability, and actually got to a point where the Minister of Justice made a commitment to make the register public. We are yet to see that happen. And so we've raised parliamentary questions about the secrecy. We forced the Minister's hand to ensure that she puts forward another deadline, having missed the previous one, to make it public. We've again submitted a PAIA application to access the register. We've called for public accessibility, and we've campaigned publicly and now have nearly 20,000 signatures that were garnered in a petition. The importance with this is that we work a lot with interventions once the crimes have taken place, when it comes to gender-based violence and femicide, and when it comes to violent crimes in South Africa as a whole. But we don't work in making sure that we have preventative measures. And this is one of the preventative measures, to make sure that women, to make sure that those who take care of vulnerable persons can ensure that they are able to safeguard themselves. We always know the names of the perpetrators, of the victims, but barely ever know the names of the perpetrators, who then come back into society and become repeat offenders. 9 out of 10 of them become repeat offenders. And so those are the legislative interventions that we have made in Parliament. We are going to be starting a new term, and we will continue to be committed to being a constructive opposition, being the voice of South Africans. Thank you. I now hand over to our member in the Gauteng legislature, Ayanda Ali, and she will give an outline on some of the work that we've been doing in the legislature and in the province as a whole. Thank you, Ayanda.
Thank you so much. Please allow me to stand on the protocols that have already been established by our Chief Party Officer as I greet the leadership of Build One South Africa, as well as members of the Fourth Estate. It's an absolute privilege and an honor to stand before you and just give you a bit of an update as to what we've been up to in this past term at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. Now, by virtue of the fact that Gauteng is a little bit closer to that proverbial ground, as we always say, being on the ground, it means that very much so we will be focused on issue driving, and that we will champion the cause of our communities through legislative means as well as other tools and techniques. I'll take you through some of those various causes and issues that we have successfully championed. I'll segment them into different areas so that it's easy to follow and it's easy for us to keep track of what exactly it is that we have been up to and some of the successes and setbacks thus far. On the issues of housing, ladies and gentlemen, we are glad to report that we successfully prevented the auctioning off of land belonging to the residents of Botswaneng. Now, this issue is very much focused on land tenure. We have a community that has settled on a piece of land for over 100 years. And I say this because there literally is a Gogo who's 100 years old, who was born and raised on that plot and who still has with her what was then called a dompas to show that she worked the land there. So she's one of the labor tenants. She has since had children who have had children, and so on. It goes to the 5th generation. And one day they wake up in the morning and they see online that their land is being auctioned. No consultation, no alternative accommodation, no prior warning. They reached out to Build One South Africa, and we were able to prevent that auction from carrying through. And I think more than anything, we were then able to facilitate discussions with all the parties that are involved for them to find a lasting solution that involves also perhaps a portion of that land going back to that community and to that family. As I said, I mean, they've stayed there for centuries, and they even have graveyards to prove that their ancestors lived in that piece of land. So it is only fair that they share, and we are happy to report back that that successful prevention of the auction also led to mediation between all the parties involved and a resolution being found. A similar story can be found in Utopia. Both areas are in the Mogale City area, where we have seen a resurgence of issues that pertain to land tenure and security, and we have been fighting for those communities there. We secured legal representation for residents of Utopia Informal Settlement. That's after a breakdown in communication between themselves and some of the neighboring farms, and the ownership question when it comes to their land. Again, like the situation in Botswana, they have stayed there for centuries and have got, as I said, documentation to prove. But in the clashes that ensued, that involved law enforcement, that involved matters of legalities and court action, they were not able to see eye to eye. We have intervened and we called together all the different parties involved to find a solution for the Utopia residents. There's also been another prevention of illegal evictions. This one was in Cresswell Park. It's in the Roodepoort area, not too far from Dobsonville, where we were born and raised. The situation there that we saw is that there were communities who were residing on pieces of land, properties that they had previously rented or leased from the mining companies. Once the mining companies up and left, they left the properties in their care, and decades later they woke up one morning to find bulldozers outside, spray paint on their wall written out, and you need to leave this area. No court order, no interdict, no prior warning. We were able to intervene in that matter as well and prevent that illegal eviction of residents in the Cresswell Park area. Lastly, Leratong Village is also another area that we've been working on. It's a continuation from the previous term. And there we saw issues of demarcation as it pertains to who owns the land. The land is owned by Mogale City, but it falls under City of Johannesburg. And so as you can imagine, whenever there are issues of service delivery, the buck is always passed. And then one municipality will say, oh no, we cannot provide these services such as electrification or water or refuse removal because the land does not belong to us. And the other will then point fingers and say, well, we cannot service you because you are not part of Mogale City. We intervened there and we got confirmation from Mogale City that they will then hand over that land to COJ. We're following it up. We're also pleased to announce that we received quite a lot of support from different organs of state that collaborated with us on this to find a lasting solution in Leratong. If I can move to education now and what we've been able to do in that sector, we secured the successful payment of stipends to over 2,000 youngsters who had fallen victim to a dubious dealing of Kunjulwa Training Center. What we had here, as you can imagine, Nobuntu mentioned the issue of unemployment and youth unemployment in particular. It was also underscored by Musi Maimane, or Dr. Musi Maimane, I should say, still getting used to it. What we had was young people who were part of a learnership that took place over 2 or 3 weeks. They were promised that they would be given skills in end-user computing. And as you can imagine, that involves desktops, computers, and the like, and none of that came to pass. They finished that course without having seen a computer. They finished that course without having seen the stipends that were promised to them. And months went past, and I'm happy to say that after the intervention of Build One South Africa, as led by our regional leader here, we were able to go and agitate on their behalf and secure not only the release of their stipends that they had been waiting months for, but to also ensure that a proper learnership and a proper process follows out, so that they don't just get a certificate void of the actual learnership process, but they get a certificate that also includes the much needed skills. We don't want them to take the certificate and get a job and then we end up in that job not knowing where to switch on the computer because it was all a lie. Lastly, in the education sector, we ensured the Gauteng Department of Education conducted an investigation into an incident at Boyson's Primary School wherein 2 learners were electrocuted. They were shocked, they were severely burnt on school premises, and there was no investigation prior to the intervention of Build One South Africa. We're happy to say that we managed to get the department to not only intervene in the investigation, but to also make sure that the learners receive the much needed support psychologically, physically, financially, and otherwise. So some of the issues that we had spoken about in terms of economic development and accountability thereof, we successfully pushed for the Economic Development MEC to investigate family tree holdings. This is with regard to township enterprise development. This was from the previous turn, so this was a continuation, but we finally got the MEC to agree to an investigation that includes senior counsel. We have submitted questions to the House. We want to know who the senior counsel will be that will be heading up this investigation. We want to know the terms of reference of this investigation, and we want to know the scope of the probe. We do not want it to just be a superficial process. We want a forensic investigation that will follow the money and go into the bank accounts to tell us what happened to the funds that were meant for township economic development. We lobbied successfully also for the resolution of the Pick and Pay mini market store unfair business practices. We're awaiting the Competition Commission investigation results and the report into that. We continue to hold the Transport MEC to account regarding the e-hailing permit backlogs, the lack lack of implementation of the integrated transport plan, the e-hailing practice note, as well as the findings of the taxi violence inquiry. You'll remember that this is also a continuation of the previous term's work wherein we intervened in Tshwane with regards to the impounding of e-hailing driver vehicles. And last but certainly not least, as it pertains to arts and culture, we managed to secure a partial payment for funeral costs for the legendary reggae artist Carlos JJ. We know that it's been 3 years since the family was promised that they would receive funding to support the process when it comes to the burial of this legendary icon, and that fund was not forthcoming. But post the intervention of Build One South Africa, we successfully got acknowledgement from the Department of Arts and Culture in the province that they have been errant with regards to this, and that they will rectify it. A partial payment has been made, and we think that is a step in the right direction. So thank you very much for your time. I think that's all from us as I hand over to Dr. Musimaiman.
Thank you very much. I was about to let me attend to this question of a national dialogue and where it sits. First and foremost, there have been broad questions about, does South Africa need a national dialogue? We hold the view as Build One South Africa that 31 years into our democracy, it becomes important for South Africa to be able to forge a new consensus about what its own future looks like. The question on the table always is, who is on trial? Others have arrived at a national dialogue and said that the government is on trial. And yes, the government has demonstrated massive governance failures, not only on the economy, safety of citizens, and many others. But at the same time as all of that, I do think the moral fabric of our society is also on trial. Because it cannot be that the fault of accountability eventually resides itself at the hands of government, when morally so, you see parents murdering their own children. It cannot be so when you see young people falling pregnant. It cannot be so when we applaud people who are corrupt and then send them to parliament and then have a virtuous cycle that says, oh, these people have failed, but at the same time as that, as citizens, we voted for leadership that is not ethical. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We mess this national dialogue up, be assured we will not be able to hold another one. Therefore, it's within that context that we have to do everything possible to ensure that the process is not politicized, that it is not corrupted, and that ultimately it's important that the right people are in the room to have the dialogue. I hold the view that the CEO that works in Sandton must be able to have a discussion with the entrepreneur who comes from Alexandra. So as we forge a new pathway as a country for the next 31 years. So it is within that we have to say our nation is on trial when we think about the national dialogue. That's why it's important, as I'm appealing again to all the foundations, that whilst they may have challenges with the process, I want to invite them into the process. They must come back. I want to equally so say to South Africans, we have to do our best to ensure that it works. It is not politicized. It's in that reason why I wrote a letter to President Ramaphosa to say, as one commanded by the Constitution to keep national interests at the forefront and ensure that national unity is imposed, let us ensure that we achieve that. And therefore your actions must be guided as head of state, not as head of a political party. I wrote to him and asked him a number of questions, saying that ultimately this process must be transparent, it must be genuinely inclusive, and that it must ultimately have a clear plan to follow up. Many of you would know the fact that I wrote to the Ministry of Finance to request the thorough funding and the accountability of this issue. South Africans are not represented in a Lekgotla or anywhere else. They are represented in Parliament. Minister Enoch Godongwana yesterday wrote to me extensively about what the national dialogue would effectively cost. In essence, he commits the fact that coming out of the contingency reserve fund, South Africa will spend an estimated 485 million rand to be spent on the national dialogue. Now, this is not a small amount of money. It is 500 million rand, technically. You have to answer and let me place it in context. The presidency's budget, vote 1, is below R1 billion. So when you then say you are going to spend 500 million rand, you must understand that it sits as a significant vote. On another day, it could be a vote independently of itself. But what could this amount of money have done? Could have been a function of building, or at least employing 2,972 teachers at a full year's salary. You could be feeding just under 497,000 learners at 200, for a 200-day school year. You could be building just over 2,400 RDP houses. You could be providing 48,500 youth with learnerships. And ultimately, you could be supporting 24,250 startups at 20,000 rand grants. So this is what South Africa is trading against. The commitment from the Minister of Finance is we're going to use some of the money that was allocated to NEDLAC, and some of it will go to the first tranche has already been paid. Equally so that local governments and municipalities will make their contributions in kind, and they will pursue finding out where other issues, where other in-kind donations can come from in the private sector. We, as Build One South Africa, will be there to make sure that each and every rand and every cent is spent correctly. Where there have been people who have committed to say that they will not be receiving money for being part of the national dialogue, we're going to ensure that is. We want to ensure that all of these imbizos, because the majority of the fund isn't to conventions. The majority of the fund will go to the multiple events that they've put in communities. And to be more specific, they sit at about 13,000 community events, if I'm not mistaken. These events, 13,760 community dialogues to be specific, can never be used for political purposes. Can't say we're having a national dialogue in Bizo in this community and therefore we will invite people that we so choose to mobilize people we so choose. We have to depoliticize the process. We have to achieve a clear roadmap. And we have to ensure that this moment is not squandered. Because if it is squandered, here's the risk. Tomorrow, you've already seen that there are many different organizations that feel comfortable going to the United States to tell the South Africa they want to see. Tell their version of the story. You continue along that trajectory, it won't just be tariffs in the US or false narrative about South Africa. You will incentivize disinvestment into South Africa. I genuinely want to see a dialogue that yields a sense upon which it comes up with a clear roadmap. It has a baseline discussion, and that all of us at the end of it can say, indeed, this process was ours, not this process was for that political party. It is in this light that Build One South Africa will be tabling a plan for prosperity. Because you only hold a national dialogue in the midst or post a crisis. Rwanda confronted profound genocide and had to come together and say, where does it go? Singapore created a national consensus, which is audited every 5 years. Scandinavian countries came together around a number of values. European countries, Germany more specific, came up with a plan post the World War. South Africa is facing its own crisis in that more young people cannot find work. Therefore, the question must be, how do we ensure that the 55% of South Africans who are living below the upper poverty line find themselves into the middle class? This plan for prosperity will be tabled in the early parts of September. We want that to be the baseline upon which we can have a discussion about the economy. Because, to quote former President Clinton, it is about the economy. That's it. Debate many things, but it is about where South Africans find their livelihoods. So as it pertains to the national dialogue, we are keeping a close eye on this issue. This plan will be tabled, and then once we have tabled it, we will go and workshop it with the various sectors. I want to engage business in South Africa to say, how do we turn our economy around? We want to engage civil society, communities, to say, come on board, let's talk about how do we make sure South Africa is a wealthy country that includes all of us as citizens. The last point I want to close with is the discussion we've been having about the government of national unity. It is clear and common cause that after 14 months of the GNU being in government, there's been some progress, but clearly many things have not changed. The data points are telling us that in some instances there's no progress. I don't take joy in a government that does not succeed. It hurts all of us. I don't celebrate when the economy is stagnant. Too many South Africans are struggling. So when we reflect on the society as we have it, there are consequences of an economy that is stagnant. And people are asking, how do we build a government that works for all of us? In this light, there have been many speculations post the ANC's NEC about the resetting of the GNU. Part of the speculation is that they are going to increase the number of parties, of which Build One South Africa is one. I want to be categoric and say we have not engaged the African National Congress in this regard. I want to make this particular point, that at the invitation of that engagement, we are not people who simply say we go along for getting along's sake. South Africa is in crisis, so I'm not going to be invited into a fight between the ANC and the DA. In our engagement, we are going to engage on the basis of the following: that the composition cannot just bloat the cabinet, which has already been the most bloated cabinet we've seen in democratic history. That adding political parties like MK and many others will simply complicate the issue and make it impossible for us to be part of what will become a potpourri of parties who are not ideologically, let alone governmentally coherent. Can't govern simply with people and just say, let's just get ministries, etc. It requires a plan that is deliberative, that says, how do we deliver for the people of this country? We are non-negotiable on our values. We are not going to coalesce with people who are racist, want to divide this country. We're furthermore not going to work with people who don't want to uphold and defend our constitution. If we don't have a basis of agreement, what then is the purpose of governing? Citizens are desperate. They are sick and tired of politics in this sense, where while people are fighting, they are fighting each other. We need a governance roadmap that delivers for the people. It's not GNU for vibes. It must be GNU for delivery. And in this sense, we talk about a governance plan. Our key focus is that we will have a discussion if it is going to attract investment, if it is going to eradicate crime and corruption, if it is going to reform our education, if it's going to fix ESCOM, Transnet, and other SOEs, if it's going to instill ethical leadership at all costs. And furthermore, I have been at war on this issue. There have been this discussion about SETAs and agencies. I see the Minister of Higher Education, Stevens, has gone and appointed other.
Administrators, so-called.
It's about time we scrap these things. They create middleman boundaries. Let us reform. South Africa's fiscus is constrained. It's time now that we make decisions that don't suit political parties, but suit the people. In closing, local government elections are coming up. My Jose, my city, I love this town. It breaks my heart to see the state of Johannesburg and many metros. Therefore, we have to do everything in our power to make sure that we achieve change in 2026. To this effect, Bosa has always committed itself to working and speaking to a number of organizations to say, how do we put forward a compelling vision for metros and governments? How do we ensure that more people can come together to work together? So that whatever happens in the elections, you don't feel the fragmentation, but rather you have a block of parties who are willing to work together to deliver the change that we need. This is work that has been continuing and will be engaging many more organizations. And a number of weeks from now on, we'll be able to communicate further about where this is. Because at the end of the day, like you, like me, we want to be able to send people to councils who are ethical, not corrupt. South Africans are largely religious people. They are people of faith. They are honest people. I know you might think this is, but they are. That's who we are. Why are we sending crooks to councils? You know, I was speaking to some church leaders at the dialogue, and it became patently clear that what they are thinking about relative to what we are sending to government are vastly different worlds. Now is the time that we elect the best, and so whatever we put on the table has to be predicated by having ethical leadership, competent people who can run our cities and metros. So fellow South Africans, I want to table to you this mini report card and some of the issues that have been raised that tell us that Build One South Africa has never been more crucial, more critical for the citizens of this country than it has been. And the work that we've been doing, not only nationally, provincially, and locally, has been of paramount importance to make sure we safeguard the interests of the people of South Africa. It is why we wake up every morning, and thank you so much for making time to be with us. I'm happy to take a number of questions. Thank you, Steve.
No, thank you very much, leadership. Let me at this time call for questions, comments, and inputs. Just mention the name of your media house, and then let's go for a question. Who's numero uno? One, two, three, and we'll take the second part.
No, let's take this round and then sitting go.
Okay, there's always a brainwave.
Arienta.
Number one, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Nokululeko from the Daily Method. Musi, I was hoping you could give us a bit of detail just around the conversations you are having with other political parties ahead of the 2026 local government. Is it specifically to sort of, get some positions in the metros or rescue some of the metros, as you put it? Or is it generally just you going out there, forming things together, arrangements? What does that look like?
Sure. Okay.
And secondly, you spoke about not wanting to work with racists, people who do not want to uphold the Constitution and. Are you speaking about the DA perhaps? Are you saying, is this you saying, I'm open to joining the GNU, provided the DA is not there? Because
Why?
quite a lot of parties say we can join, provided the DA is not there. Is that what you're saying, effectively? Thank you.
Let's take
That
second
can't.
one. Go ahead.
My name is Yamkana Taba from 24. I'm going to start with Sis Nobuntu, if I could question. With regards to the fair wage bill, you mentioned that the workforce is warming up to it, they're responding positively. Is there any resistance to it, maybe from corporate, business, and what the unions call capital? Basically, what are our bosses saying? And then
Ndakens. No, you must be doctor or CIC, so I prefer I prefer what is authentic.
It's not the first rodeo. You have councillors. I know Nelson Mandela Bay and Krista Jack down there. Are you going to be looking at their performance going into 2026? Will you be taking stock and see what's been achieved in municipalities before fielding candidates? And then, Ayanda, you're running a one-woman show in the legislature. You sound very busy. You've listed your successes. We didn't even know some of them. Thank you for that. What are the learnings from your side? What are the challenges operating in that space?
Thank you.
The last one.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Sanda Moleko from the Sunday Times. Dr. Maimane, just two questions. Wanting to preemptively collaborate with other political parties before you campaign for the polls in 2026, is this an admission of sort of failure that you can't do it alone, or is it wanting to reach greater heights through collaboration? And secondly, if this national dialogue is to be successful in the mission you put forward, which is for the nation to be put on trial, how do we ensure that all citizens participate? We know that we've got a problem of voter or political apathy in this country. How is it that Bosa envisions getting everyone to participate and not people to sit on the sidelines because they've lost faith in our political systems? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me take some of the questions. Let me start with the question you asked in the Daily Maverick. Firstly, let me not be self-selective about which parties. I've laid out principles. Non-racialism, upholding of the Constitution, the commitment to an economy that grows, people who are not corrupt, and we have ethical leaders. That can spread across multiple places. Because there are parties that are patently corrupt. Now you have those parties also in the GNU. I can't. I have a genuine challenge with parties who simply say, we only represent this race. That is a challenge. So I'm not going to say this one, that one, because people might make this false assumption that I have issues with the DA. I don't. I don't have issues with, I have principles that we must stand up for. Because not just, in some ways you can find the anti-constitutionalists, for example, like the MK, who have insisted that the constitution must be taken aside. That is a question. You have people who have looted from VBS, etc. These are issues that you cannot run a government on a false start on that basis. So I put it on principle rather than saying specifically that one, that one, that one. My preferred scenario is that we must move beyond the statement of intent. The statement of intent is nice. Even the ANC says in that statement of intent, we will fight against corruption. It's 31 years. What measures are we going to put in place tangibly that say, here is our proclamations on anti-corruption? Because in the absence of a plan for delivery, here's what happens. You have version 1 of the budget, version 2 of the budget, then version 3. You're gonna, next year, if we don't agree on a plan, I'm telling you, this year we were lucky to vote for it, third time lucky. Next year, you'll be discussing version 5, version 6, budget 4.0, 5 point whatever, because there's no plan. Let's agree on a plan that then says, these are the fundable priorities, here's where we are going. Once we get there, I promise you the budgeting process will be easy. It will free the Minister of Finance. So these are the principles we stand by. Let's deliver on those. I'm not one of those who says this one, that one. Let's stick with principles. So all parties have their own issues for different reasons. Let me park it there. To your earlier question about what, and I think I join it with the third question, why the offer in the local government elections? I started with Johannesburg being in crisis. Politics, when I left Parliament in 2019, the reason you have Nobuntu and Ayanda who are not in politics is principally because I wanted for South Africa to realize that it is indeed in their hands. The offering that we have to make to citizens has to be about rescuing Johannesburg, rescuing the metros, so that it is a vision that encompasses all sectors of society. If it is about solving for political parties, you run the risk of just merging people and achieving the same outcomes. But if it is about envisioning citizens for a broader coalition that says this coalition wants to work together to deliver change, then that's what we have to do. I want to sum it up this way. Let's talk about Ward 48 in Dobsonville, the ward I come from. If in Ward 48, the ballot paper has 10 parties, and each of those parties get 10 votes, or 9 of those parties get 10 votes, the party that has 12 votes wins the ward. Whereas the other 9, if they work together, they could have won the ward. Follow what I mean? So there's a pragmatic question that says, if we come together, could we not achieve greater, particularly in wards that are based in Johannesburg, or Tshwane, or Ekurhuleni, or Cape Town, or whatever the case might be? And so it is about solving that question equally so and envisioning citizens for a country that they'd like to live in. That is what we are trying to achieve. Because if we fail at that task, next year, Bosa will have a showing, perform well, this one will perform well, that one will. But then when you look at the potential of the aggregation, the sum of the parts, there's a risk that the dark horse that comes from this side, with just a few votes extra, which we could have beaten if we clubbed together, wins the ward and we struggle. It's a tactical response to saying you don't want elements of populists who are unconstitutionalists winning via the back door. That's an existential question here. The question about the fair wage is not mine. I'll respond. Let me close with this. Sisanda, you are correct. We've learned a lot of things. One of the things we learned in 2021, I can use places like Makanda, I can use the places like the Val. The big lessons are, unless you bring all your councillors in one umbrella and strategically lead with them, some of your challenges are you may end up with some councillors who are vulnerable to being bought when votes are being cast. And so then they end up shifting and sometimes being ignorant of the community. If you say you are Musi Maimane, you represent this community, then certainly the community must hold you accountable. That's the mechanism we're infusing. But furthermore, there must be a structure that also holds you accountable so that when you betray that community, the community can exercise its right to remove you. So there's some lessons in that regard. But also, there are many other issues. So when you put them on the table, how do we create coherent, shared objectives so that people are not arbitrarily thumb-sucking what they should vote for, how they should vote? It is about, in essence, saying, here's what we are wanting to advance. If I was to take over Johannesburg tomorrow morning, and that is the objective, we want to govern in places because we are going to be living in coalition. So in a coalition environment, how do you then ensure that at the end of the day, you have a vision that says Johannesburg can have infrastructure that is built? No business is run national. All businesses are run local. So learn from places like where Clover disinvested. I think it's the Tsobot, where you find disinvestment because of the failure of a municipality. Let us build municipalities that can attract investment. Many of the municipalities are heavily indebted, by the way. That's why Johannesburg can't pay for electricity. It's a fact. It has to enter into DAAs or distributor agency agreements with Eskom. So we have to come in here and understand that here are the challenges, we've got the best trained people and we can deliver the change. That has to be the fundamental lessons offering that we put forward. And then lastly, in a world where we are discussing, I don't have a problem with old people. I really don't. I genuinely don't. But I'm very cautious that to say we need a new breed of leadership coming into metros. Abantu abadala must help us learn the lessons and the mistakes they've made. But for us to still be voting, let me leave the subtweeting to that.
Thank you very much, DP.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for the question, and I think it's an important one, and I've actually gone out to pull some exact criticisms that have come out. The criticisms that we've really gotten, the only criticisms that have been public that we've gotten, have come from the DA. And there have been a few. One of them has been that employers, because the context of the Fair Pay Bill is saying that you, as an employer, should not be able and will not be able to ask an applicant for their previous or their current salary. Because what that does is that people who are applicants then get paid on the basis of what they're being paid now, whether or not that was fair. And often we know that these are issues that have historical discrimination entrenched in them. And so we're saying that you shouldn't have to disclose what you are earning or what you have been earning. You should merely be appointed and remunerated on the basis of your experience, your expertise, and your qualification, and on the basis of the work that you're going to be doing. And that should be within the same bracket, and it should be equitable with what anybody else in that organization, regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of anything else which is beyond experience and merit, is earning. And that's what it's about. And so the DA says, well, employers via the MP, Michael Bagram, who's been saying this in interviews and has been publicly commenting on it, is that employers will always ask what your pay history is. And now that can't be the basis upon which you fight a bill. It is a historically discriminatory practice, and it is the very reason why we should oppose that harmful norm that exists. So that's the first that they've said. And ultimately what they're doing is they're defending a status quo as business as usual. And it is incorrect to want to protect a status quo just because it's been done. And it doesn't mean that just because it's been done, it has been correct or fair, that it has been a norm. Another has been that this doesn't in any way increase jobs or increase employment in the country. The reality is that when you look at similar bills that have been introduced in other countries, what it has done is that it has introduced an economy or a marketplace or a workforce that is more experienced, a workforce that is more competent, because now you're competing on the basis of merits. And then the last one that they've said is that most companies already disclose pay ranges and adverts, and that's not true. Just now we had Parliament actually advertise a graduate program, literally 2 weeks ago, and they've actually just extended the deadline yesterday, where it did not disclose what the pay bracket is. And so it is not a kept practice, and the lack of transparency actually disproportionately affects young people, it disproportionately affects women and new graduates, and it gets them, it captures them into cycles of underpayment, because if you're basing it on what you were initially paid, you will always then be getting paid less than what you're supposed to do. And so that's what we've had really. It is though a criticism that really is typical of the DA, who want to entrench inequalities under the guise of protecting business freedom. Nobody's saying that we are dictating to business what it is that they must pay. We're saying it must be fair and you must disclose it. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm going to try and be very brief. I'm going to give you a bit of context just so you understand the gravity of it all. You have a new political party, you have a new politician, and you have a new member of the legislature and a sole member of the legislature. So just looking at that dynamic in itself can get very overwhelming. And so what we deliberately chose to do in Gauteng was not to do that, not to focus on the fact that there's one member at the legislature, but to look at the community in totality that we have here in Gauteng. What we did was to realize that I may be alone as a member, but I'm not on my own. So what does that mean? We got into the legislature and immediately started to do what is called hashtag GT in GP, which means Govern Together in Gauteng Province, where we made an open call to all people on social media and other platforms to say, what do you want us to push in the legislature? What do you want us to drive in the House? And we were overwhelmed with the responses. In fact, all of the successes and wins that we've highlighted are as a direct result of governing together with the people of Gauteng. The Fair Pay Bill was an individual who came forward to say, this is what I'm going through. Can you guys solve for that? The family tree investigation, it was a whistleblower who came to us to say, hey, look, there was this finding in the 6th administration that has not been followed up. Bosa, can you champion this for us? The e-hailing debacle, all of the causes that we've ever ran, and with e-hailing was so funny because people were asking, "Ukuthi nina as Bosa ningenaphi?" Sathi singena ngomnyango, because it was the e-hailers who opened the door to say, champion this for us. So that was one of the ways that we made sure that we are not just one member. You may be one individual sitting on the seat, but in fact, you are representing all the people in Gauteng who have subscribed to GT in GP. And then we have a group in Gauteng that supports me. We used to call ourselves the Four Cousins, but it's not what you think. And they're here. I don't know if they can wave or stand, but these are the hands and feet of Build One South Africa. They're the eyes and ears. Whenever I'm in a community, we spread ourselves so that we can be effective and impactful where we are. And then we have tremendous support from national. Like I said, when we got an issue in Gauteng from a resident who was saying, I'm being discriminated against on the basis of my payslip, we were able to say, as Gauteng, we cannot solve for that because we are limited in our scope, but we can send it to national and they can fight for you on that behalf, and they've been able to do that. So still one member, but you have the community, you have the team, you have national, and then in the House itself, funny enough, we have collegial relations with other parties that have been able to see the work that we do as Bosa, and we have partnered with them on a number of issues, case-by-case basis, to the point where we were able to be elected as part of the executive of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus. So we sit in that executive there, voted for by the MK, voted for by the EFF, and voted for by Action SA, who recognize that Build South Africa, with their one sitinyana Shem, deserve to be in the EXCO, and it's because of that support in the community, national, and everybody who has journeyed with us. So I may be alone, but I'm not on my own. But thank you so much for that question. I think, yeah, at first, and then we made the circle bigger and we opened up and we found that there are more people who are willing to journey with us and make this a success. So thank you so much. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Let me thank the leadership for the extensive report and feedback that they gave to you, and also thank all our structures for being here, and most importantly, thank you, because you are the eyes and ears and the mouthpiece for us to be able to communicate to our voters and the general South African public. So thank you for gracing this event and the precise agenda. I wish you all the best. Our leader will be leaving, but the DP will be here just for bilaterals. Thank you very much, Mudumukio, the precise agenda.